host, Kat Smith. And with me today, I have the directors behind the film that will be at Sonoma International Film Festival later this month, Chasing Childhood. And if you're listening on 91.3 FM KSBY Sonoma, you will still have a chance to get tickets. And if you're seeing this later after the festival airs, hopefully it will be a big smash hit and it will be available everywhere. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kat. It's good to be here.
And since I can see Eden right now, why don't you introduce yourself first?
I'm Eden Wurmfeld, and I'm one of the filmmakers behind Chasing Childhood. We're so happy to be part of the Sonoma Film Festival this year, and we look forward to hearing from listeners about their experience of watching the movie, because we've never seen the film with an audience.
Oh, that's such a bummer about this being virtual this year, because I feel like filmmakers really get a lot out of seeing it the first time with a big audience.
It's so true. So true.
And Margaret, let's introduce you.
Hi, I am Margaret Munzer Loeb. I am also a director on the film Chasing Childhood. And I also really wish I was with you all and could hear your thoughts on if this relates to things you've experienced with either growing up or raising kids or what you've seen around you.
And that's a good point too. If you see the film, reach out to them, share your experiences with them. This is a documentary feature. And why don't you give us kind of a nutshell overview?
You want me to take that?
Sure.
Okay. So Chasing Childhood is a film really intended to be about the unintended consequences of overparenting, overprotecting, and overpressuring kids, and is a little bit, explores kids in 3 different locations and their lives, but hopefully asks the viewer to reconsider or to think about how kids might thrive if they had more autonomy and free play, and how that may lead them to go on to be healthier, happier, more competent adults through personal stories.
And I'm curious, when did you film this? Because I wonder if 2020 would have maybe changed the focus a bit for you.
No doubt that, our creative work on the film we were done filming when the pandemic hit. We were in post-production. So I think that we have been amazed how the film has held up in spite of the pandemic, and that the pandemic has kind of brought a lot of the issues that we're raising in the film into the fore. So that's been a really interesting experience. And we hope that the audience will share if that's their experience as well. But, one of the things that was really interesting, I live in New York City, and in the lockdown in the spring, I realized that I was hearing the sound of kids playing outside my window for the first time in my adult life, because all the scheduled activities were canceled. School was not in person, and they were it was more kind of crisis learning in New York City. Like, none of the schools had it down yet. So there wasn't really an idea of what was happening, and everybody had a different schedule. But I heard, I'd sit in my office working with the windows open in the spring, and I just heard kids outside, and it was incredible. And similarly, not only were there a lot of streets closed for play and for kids to access safe outdoor play in New York City, and a lot of those have been maintained and supposedly will carry forward after COVID. But I also was amazed that when I would go out doing errands with one of my own children, I would see kids playing basketball in the street. My own son would bring a ball as we would walk and would just dribble it. These are my kids, are kids who have a very intense schedule and never would have been around in an afternoon to go to the grocery store with me. So it just changed things. It has changed things a lot. And I think one of the questions that Margaret and I have been asking is, in this time of forced kind of reset, what like, there's been a lot of pain and a lot of suffering and a lot of challenge, but there's also been some silver linings. And I think where childhood and parenting are concerned, there are some things that we might want to carry forward, while there are many other things that we can't wait to return to. So that's been a lot of our conversation.
I think if you don't mind me sharing a little personal anecdote, my I have two kittens. One is a teenager, one is preteen, and the younger one. So this year was her first year in middle school, which means instead of one classroom, she's in multiple classrooms. And I was already having personal parenting anxiety about her going from one situation to another. The older daughter seamlessly did it, and I knew she would. But the younger daughter, I thought, was going to have trouble with multiple teachers, multiple assignments, all of that coming at her so quickly. So I feel like, in part, the pandemic helped in that now she's at one screen. She doesn't have to move about the classrooms move about her. But I also see something that I don't think I would have seen if she was in the classroom. I see the anxiety level of wanting to keep up with, and our school for some reason gives them their grades every single day, which I think is insanity, because I don't think kids need to be that on top of where they are. But because she's getting all A's, which is incredible, I can see the anxiety it's providing her. So and I think anxiety is a big focus of your film also, isn't it?
Yes.
So in part, this is giving me an insight that I wouldn't have if she was moving about the classrooms, because I don't think I would see it after school. What who Let's talk about some of your experts. Who are your experts in the film, and how did you go about finding them? What are they experts in?
So Lenore Skenazy actually is committed to running, this organization, Let Grow. And she actually has made this like a life career. She was a journalist and a mother who let her 9-year-old ride the subway because she thought he was ready, and ended up on news shows, kind of being called the worst mother in the world. And kind of she sort of fell into this, but she goes around and talks to kids and families and schools, and has created these Let Grow projects to foster independence in kids. Julie Lithcott-Hames was the former dean of freshmen at Stanford, and she wrote a book, How to Raise an Adult. And we got in touch with her because we love the book. I think Eden wanted to make the book into a movie, and she's amazing. And Peter Gray was someone who also worked with Lenore, but he's really a psychologist who's been exploring how almost like play deficit, the importance of play, and how play is necessary for human development. And we came across these people, in a variety of ways through other people who were passionate about education, and also just reaching out and saying, we love what you do, and would you be willing to talk to us?
I just want to add that Peter Gray is a PhD in psychology, and he considers himself a biological psychologist. That's his title at Boston College, and he conducts research there. So I just wanted to add to what Margaret said. And then Julie Lithcott-Hames, she's still probably on the speaking circuit, and she has a new book coming out, which is kind of the sequel, I think, to How to Raise an Adult, which we're really excited about.
And she's in the Bay Area, I just will add, in terms of this festival.
Yes, because we're in Sonoma Valley in the Bay Area. And how did you guys get together and decide this is the film we're making?
Well, so Margaret and I were roommates long ago, in our 20s, and have been friends ever since. And we were sitting around kind of talking about our experience raising our own children and how differently we were raising them from how we grew up. So it started out really kind of an anecdotal question, kind of like, I think we were so much more independent than at a much earlier age. And, we had this conversation, and then I think I went and I looked in my photo albums, and I was like, I have a photograph of myself in my first grade classroom, and my key is around my neck. So I know that I was in first grade. I recognize that classroom. I know that t-shirt that I was wearing, And because I have memories of getting off a school bus, coming home, letting myself in, climbing up on the counter, getting into the cabinets, taking down cookies, making myself a snack. And then my mother would show up at some point between like 4 and 6 o'clock. And, it wasn't considered neglectful, and it was just my world. And I had an older brother, and I had friends on the block, neighborhood friends who I played with. I went to school outside the neighborhood. But that was my experience. And then Margaret also had a similar kind of independence, and she can talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, we were both raised in New York City, which allowed for a certain kind of autonomy, which we later found there were similar kinds of autonomy in other neighborhoods, but meaning we didn't have to rely on somebody driving us somewhere. So I think 9, 10, I was taking 2 public, maybe a little later than some kids actually, because I had to take 2 public buses to get to school, which involved changing buses as opposed to 1. And I was not going with a sibling. But I took 2 public buses. But I also, before that, had an older brother who took me around my own neighborhood by the time I was 5 or 6. So that means he was 9 or 10, and we could go just about anywhere. And nobody asked questions and then, that meant like, how did we fill our time when we were doing things? It could be anything from playing games on the street to getting pizza to going to an arcade, finding other, and anyway, so became really aware that I lived a block away from school, and it would be completely not okay for me to send them on their own to school. And we started asking why. And was this good? Like, was this a good change? Was it actually better? Were we looking at our own past through rose-colored glasses? This was something we were kind of often told to be really careful about. Like, bad things happen to kids too. And so I think that led to a little bit of exploration that there may have been reasons for people to get nervous and make a change, but there have been things that have been lost, and things that are having a real impact on how kids are growing up to feel like they are autonomous and competent and resilient, that, in the name of keeping them kind of safe and scheduled are somewhat detrimental later on for some of them.
I feel like, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that it's interesting because I think there's been an overcorrection, as Margaret's saying, where like often you see a problem and then the pendulum swings in the other way and then it swings back. And what we have heard repeatedly from various of the experts that we interviewed, and we interviewed so many more than we could put in the film, is that the pendulum on the safety and the overprotection and the drive for also kind of excellence in school and striving just keeps, like, the combination of those two things just keeps swinging in the same direction of more. And I mean, I think that it not only has had some negative repercussions, as Margaret says, when people get older, but we actually saw a lot of kids in crisis as children, which just was incredibly heartbreaking. And some of that is in the film. And of course, there are a lot, these things are multifactorial, and we're not trying to oversimplify them, but we certainly, I think, learned a lot as not only as filmmakers, but as parents in the course of making this film.
I was just going to say, I had a similar childhood, although you guys being in New York, it is probably a little bit scarier because Sonoma Valley was pretty tame back then. But I think things like, I feel like you guys are around the same generation as me. And, I remember the freedom that you had and feeling like it was normal. Like we were all doing that. We were all letting ourselves in, getting the snack and all of that. But also in our childhood is when the introduction of the milk cartons with the kids, missing kids on them, came out. And I think subconsciously, I think I grew up with that feeling of being scared for the next generation. So it's one of those things, like I didn't even realize it until you were talking and watching the film and things that was in there. But there's these little things that are ingrained in us as we're growing up alone in a house that affect us more as grownups than we realize.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you put that really well, because I always say I grew up kind of during that time, or I remember I was probably around Eitan Patz's age, who went missing in New York City, but like that didn't really change my parents' parenting at the time. It kind of took some time for the next generation to really make that shift. I don't exactly know why that is, but I agree with you that that's kind of what happened, and that maybe we had, culture is a strange thing. Like, I think that that's the other thing. I think what we really became called upon and interested in the idea of changing culture, and how much the idea that you can parent in a vacuum really doesn't work. I mean, we all know that, like when you try to set norms for your kid that are so outside of the norms of anybody else, like the struggle is greater than I feel like I can handle. And the judgment of other people or the school, or it's just, you can go seek an alternative culture. But I think we really wanted to find a way to have a conversation that could lead to some culture shift, and maybe the pendulum at least swinging back in some places, that gives kids a little more wiggle room, and parents a little more wiggle room, frankly.
Yeah, I think we need to start learning to loosen up a little bit. Otherwise, we're creating the next generation of adults who will just never leave their house, and their children will never go anywhere. I think it's an important message you're sharing.
One thing I would just say, I give this example a lot, like, because this was, it's not all about like, will you disappear? Like, will they disappear? That I had a child who was cooking by second grade, not like, making eggs. And this didn't even occur to me as being a particularly big deal. Maybe because I learned young and I was here. I mean, I was around and I taught him, and but parents were like, oh my God, he made that. Well, you must have turned the oven on for him. You must have turned the stove on. I'm like, well, it's really not that hard. What do you envision happening? And I find that like piece of asking people what might happen if they get burned a little bit. What might happen if they climb the thing in the playground and we have in the film, Genevieve is running around after her kids. She says she was the worst mother in the playground. Well, what would have happened if her child fell down? There's that, it's not in our movie, but the blessings of a skinned knee. And so to have a whole kind of generation of parenting that like literally couldn't tolerate that fall even, much less these more catastrophic ideas of what could go wrong. And similarly, what might happen if my kid doesn't get into one of 12 colleges? What might that look like for them? And I think that all of those things sort of seem different, but there's a similar quality of a narrowness to what it looks like to be okay. And I think because it's so narrow, a lot of kids weren't okay, and that really we need a lot more range in what's acceptable.
Well, it's a very important film for parents. And I think even if you're not a parent or planning to be a parent, it's an important message for you also, in that we all need to learn to support each other and judge less. And we need to give the future generations freedom to grow and learn also. So the movie is called Chasing Childhood. We have been talking to Eden and Margaret, the directors. And do you want to give out some links how people can find out more about you, about other films, how they can follow the progress of this film?
The best way to do that is to go to our website, which is chasingchildhooddoc.com, chasingchildhooddoc. So check us out there, and you can also sign up for our newsletter there. And I think that's the best way to find us. We've got lots of festivals coming up if you miss us at Sonoma that are not necessarily geo-blocked, so you can watch them anywhere in the United States.
And we are coming to schools and communities if you are interested.
Oh, that's wonderful. Travel with it. Yes.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to KSBY right now and you want to get tickets, the website is sonomafilmfest.org. And if you're listening after that, then you can find them at one of the many other festivals and check them out online. So thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It was great to be here. We're so happy for the launch.